Welcome back, dear friends. Before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching, and please don't forget to subscribe and like to support the channel. Your presence here helps these gentle conversations reach others, seeking understanding in the stillness of evening. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. These words, written 1600 years ago by a man named Augustine, have echoed through the centuries with a haunting familiarity. Perhaps you have felt it yourself, that inexplicable restlessness that no achievement can quiet, no pleasure can satisfy, no success can silence. The gnawing sense that something is missing, that you are searching for something you cannot quite name. But here is what makes these words so remarkable. They were written by a man who spent the first 33 years of his life running in the opposite direction, a brilliant lawyer and master of persuasive speech, a man devoted to worldly pleasures, to the thrill of intellectual debate, to the satisfaction of physical desire, a man who had everything the Roman Empire could offer, yet felt the hollow ache of emptiness growing larger with each passing year. Tonight, we are going to walk with Augustine through the darkest valleys of his searching. We will feel the weight of his mother's prayers, shed through decades of tears. We will sit with him in gardens of crisis, stand beside him as he hears voices that change everything, accompany him into philosophical depths that still reshape how we understand time, memory, and the very nature of human longing. This is not a simple story of a sinner who becomes a saint. It is far more mysterious than that. It is the story of a heart that could not stop seeking, even when it was seeking in all the wrong places. A mind that could not settle for easy answers, even when easy answers would have made life so much simpler. A soul torn between the pleasure of the moment and the peace of eternity. Augustine's life contains a question that haunts every human heart. What are we really searching for when we chase after love, success, meaning, truth? And more troubling still, what if the very restlessness that torments us is actually the homing signal of the soul, calling us back to something we have never consciously known but have always deeply recognized? We will explore how Augustine wrestled with the problem of evil in a world created by a good God. We will discover his revolutionary insights about the nature of time itself, insights that neuroscientists are only now beginning to confirm. We will enter the vast cathedral of memory he constructed, where past and future meet in the eternal present of consciousness. We will witness a conversion so dramatic it has shaped the spiritual imagination of the Western world. But perhaps most important for those of us listening tonight, as the day fades into darkness, as our own restless hearts prepare for the surrender of sleep, we will discover that Augustine's journey is not ancient history. It is the journey every human heart makes, whether in his century or ours. The technology changes, the empires rise and fall, but the fundamental question remains: where can the restless heart find rest? So settle into your space of rest. Let your breathing slow. Allow the gentle rhythm of this ancient story to carry you forward, or perhaps deeper within, because Augustine discovered something that matters just as much tonight as it did in the 4th century. The heart that seeks is already, mysteriously, being sought. The restless one is already held in an embrace that will not let go. The journey begins not in triumph, but in the ordinary chaos of a young life searching for meaning in a world that offers everything except what the soul truly needs. The year is 354, in the North African town of Thagast. In what we now call Algeria, in the waning years of the Roman Empire's glory, a child is born who will shape Western thought for the next 16 centuries. His mother, Monica, is a devout Christian, her faith as fierce as the African sun. His father, Patricius, is a pagan, a minor Roman official with limited means but grand ambitions for his brilliant son. They name him Aurelius Augustinus, but history will know him simply as Augustine. From the beginning there is tension in this household. Monica prays with the intensity of someone who knows her prayers are all she has. She makes her son a catechumen, marking him for Christianity even as he grows up in a world saturated with pagan religion, philosophy, and the casual violence of imperial power. Patricius wants something different for his boy. He wants success, prestige, the kind of worldly achievement that can lift a family from the middle class into the circles of real power. Young Augustine inherits from both parents. From his mother, a sensitivity to spiritual things, a capacity for depth that will never let him rest in superficial explanations. From his father, ambition, intelligence, and a hunger for recognition that will drive him toward the glittering prizes of the empire. But there is something else too, something Augustine himself will struggle his entire life to understand, a capacity for pleasure that seems insatiable, a need for love that no human relationship can satisfy, a restlessness that expresses itself in constant movement, constant seeking, constant trying to fill an emptiness that only grows larger the more he feeds it. His parents scrape together the money to send him to Carthage for advanced education. Carthage, the great city of North Africa, is everything Thagaste is not. It is sophisticated, cosmopolitan, decadent. It is where young men go to make something of themselves, and where many lose themselves in the process. Years later, Augustine will write about his arrival in Carthage with a mixture of horror and honesty that still has the power to make us uncomfortable. He describes coming to a city where a cauldron of unholy love sizzled and crackled around him. He is not making excuses. He is not blaming Carthage for corrupting his innocence. He is admitting something darker and more troubling. He loved the corruption. He sought it out. He threw himself into it with the same intensity he brought to his studies. At 17, Augustine takes a mistress. This is not unusual for a young Roman man of his class. Marriages are arranged affairs, matters of property and alliance. A concubine provides companionship, physical pleasure, domestic comfort, without the legal complications of marriage. For 13 years, Augustine will live with this unnamed woman. She will bear him a son, a Deodatus, which means gift from God. The irony of the name is not lost on Augustine, even in his youth. But what is remarkable in Augustine's later reflections is his honesty about the complexity of this relationship. It was not simply lust, though lust was certainly part of it. It was not simply convenience, though convenience played a role. There was genuine affection, companionship, perhaps even love of a kind. Yet Augustine knows something is disordered in his heart. He is using another human being to try to fill a void she cannot possibly fill. He is seeking in her arms a peace that no human touch can provide. This becomes clearer when tragedy strikes. Augustine has a close friend, someone with whom he shares everything, intellectual conversations that stretch late into the night, dreams of the future, the kind of friendship that feels like finding another part of yourself. This friend falls ill with a fever. In his delirium, while unconscious, he is baptized as a Christian. When he recovers, Augustine makes jokes about the baptism, expecting his friend to laugh it off. Instead, his friend rebukes him. He takes the baptism seriously. He is changed in some fundamental way Augustine cannot understand. Days later, the friend relapses and dies. Augustine's grief is total, devastating. Everything in Thagaste reminds him of his lost friend. Every street they walked together, every place they sat and talked, every memory now a wound that will not heal. He writes later with stunning psychological insight about the strange math of grief. One friend dies, and half of your soul dies with him. Yet you remain alive, which means you are now half a soul walking around, pretending to be whole. He flees back to Carthage, trying to outrun the grief. But grief travels with you. What Augustine discovers in this pain is something that will haunt him for years. Anything you can lose will eventually break your heart. Any love that attaches to something mortal is a love that sets you up for devastation. The problem is not that he loved his friend too much. The problem is that he loved his friend as if his friend could be the ultimate good, the final resting place for his heart's affection. But if you cannot love mortal things as ultimate goods, what can you love that way? Where can you place your heart's deepest affections without setting yourself up for inevitable loss? Augustine does not know the answer yet, So he does what many brilliant young people do when confronted with questions they cannot answer. He throws himself into his studies and his pleasures with equal intensity, hoping that constant activity will drown out the questions his heart keeps asking. He excels in rhetoric, the art of persuasive speech. He can argue any side of any question with devastating effectiveness. Truth becomes secondary to victory. What matters is not what is right, but what wins. He becomes very good at this game, and it brings him exactly what his father dreamed of: success, recognition, the admiration of his peers. But there is a moment, small but significant, that reveals something darker in Augustine's soul. One evening, he and a group of friends pass by a pear tree. The tree belongs to a neighbour. The pears are not particularly good, no one is hungry, but Augustine and his friends steal the pears anyway. They take more than they can eat, throw most of them to the pigs, keep a few just for the thrill of having taken them. Years later, in his Confessions, Augustine will devote pages to analysing this seemingly trivial incident. Why does it haunt him? Because he realises he sinned for no reason at all. Not hunger, not need, not even desire for those particular pears. He sinned simply because it was wrong, and there was pleasure in the wrongness itself. The thrill of transgression, of choosing evil for its own sake. This terrifies Augustine more than any act of passion, more than any giving in to overwhelming desire, because it suggests something deeply disordered at the core of human nature. We do not just sin when tempted beyond our capacity to resist. We sometimes choose evil when nothing compels us, when we could just as easily choose good. We become evil for no reason, and this reasonless malice is more disturbing than any catalogue of spectacular sins. I became evil for no reason. These words will echo through Western thought for centuries. They capture something about human darkness that philosophy and psychology are still trying to fully understand. But Augustine's rebellion extends beyond stealing pears. He is searching for intellectual answers to the questions that plague him. Why is there suffering if God is good? Why do good people suffer while evil people prosper? If God is all-powerful, why does evil exist at all? The Christian answers he hears from his mother's faith seem simplistic, intellectually unsatisfying. The Bible, when he tries to read it, strikes him as crude literature, full of bizarre stories and contradictory moral teachings. The God of the Old Testament seems jealous, angry, arbitrary. How can this be the ultimate truth? And so, seeking answers, Augustine finds himself drawn to a movement called Manichaeism. This is a dualistic religion, one that offers a clean, simple answer to the problem of evil. The universe, the Manichaeans teach, is a battleground between two equal and opposite forces: light and darkness, spirit and matter, good and evil. Everything good comes from the realm of light. Everything evil comes from the realm of darkness. This makes sense to Augustine in a way Christianity does not. It explains why there is evil without blaming God for creating it. It explains why Augustine feels torn between spirit and flesh, why he knows what is right but does what is wrong. It is not his fault. He is simply caught in the cosmic struggle between these two forces, particles of light trapped in the darkness of matter. For 9 years, Augustine remains a Manichaean. He rises through their ranks, becomes a respected teacher of their doctrines. He brings other young people into the movement, convincing them with his formidable rhetorical skills that this is the truth about the universe. But even as he argues for Manichaeism, doubts are growing. The Manichaean leaders he meets turn out to be less intellectually impressive than he expected. When he asks difficult questions, they defer to a great teacher named Faustus, who will supposedly have all the answers. When Faustus finally arrives and Augustine meets him, he discovers a charming speaker, but a shallow thinker. Faustus admits he does not know the answers to Augustine's questions. This shakes Augustine profoundly. He has invested 9 years in this system. He has convinced others to adopt it. But now he is beginning to suspect it is built on foundations of sand. Meanwhile, his rhetorical skills are bringing him success. He moves from Carthage to Rome, then to Milan, the imperial capital of the Western Roman Empire. He secures a prestigious appointment as the official rhetor for the imperial court. This is the pinnacle of his profession. He will argue cases before the emperor himself. His father's dreams have been more than fulfilled. And yet, the restlessness grows stronger, not weaker. Success has not brought peace. Achievement has not filled the void. The pleasures that once thrilled him now feel hollow, like trying to satisfy hunger by eating pictures of food. Augustine is becoming a success by every measure the world recognizes, and he is coming apart from the inside. Monica, who has been praying for 30 years, follows her son to Milan. She will not give up on him. She will not stop believing that her prayers matter, that God hears, that her restless, brilliant, pleasure-seeking son will somehow, someday, find his way home. But Augustine does not yet know there is a home to return to. He only knows the restlessness is becoming unbearable. The question is no longer whether he needs to change. The question is whether change is even possible for someone like him. The search for answers is about to take a dramatic turn, because in Milan, Augustine is about to encounter ideas and people that will shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about truth, about God, about himself. The intellectual journey is about to begin in earnest. And intellectual journeys, as Augustine will discover, have a way of becoming spiritual journeys when we are not looking. Milan in the year 384 is the heart of the Western Roman Empire's power. Here the emperor holds court, surrounded by the machinery of imperial administration that spans from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the borders of Persia. And here Augustine has achieved what seemed impossible for the son of a minor official from a provincial African town. He is the voice of the emperor, the official rhetorician whose words shape policy and propaganda. Everything he has worked for, everything his father dreamed of, has come to pass. He should be satisfied. He should be at peace. But the restlessness gnaws at him more fiercely than ever. Success has brought not satisfaction, but a clearer view of success's emptiness. The applause fades. The approval does not fill the void. The achievement that looked so glorious from a distance turns out to be just another thing that cannot bear the weight of ultimate meaning. Augustine is becoming desperate. He needs answers to questions that are no longer merely intellectual puzzles, but matters of spiritual survival. If Manichaeism has failed him, where can he turn? What system of thought can make sense of a world that seems so full of suffering, so marked by injustice, so resistant to simple explanations? He encounters another philosophical school that promises answers, academic skepticism, which teaches that true knowledge is impossible. We cannot know anything with certainty. All our beliefs are provisional. All our confidence is misplaced. The wise person suspends judgment, accepts the limits of human knowledge, lives with uncertainty. For a time, this appeals to Augustine's wounded intellect. If he cannot find truth, perhaps the problem is not with him, but with the very possibility of truth. Perhaps the search itself is misguided. Perhaps wisdom consists in accepting that we are fundamentally unable to know. But skepticism brings no peace. It is one thing to acknowledge uncertainty about trivial matters. It is quite another to live in permanent suspension about questions of ultimate meaning. How should I live? What is worth loving? Does my life have purpose? If skepticism cannot answer these questions, it cannot satisfy the needs of a human heart. Augustine finds himself in a kind of philosophical and spiritual limbo. He no longer believes the Manichaean answers. He cannot accept skeptical non-answers. Christianity still seems intellectually crude to him. He is suspended between systems, belonging to none, desperate for something solid to stand on. And then two things happen that begin to shift the ground beneath his feet. First, he begins reading the Neoplatonists, particularly the works of Plotinus translated into Latin. Here, Augustine encounters ideas that resonate with something deep inside him. Plotinus teaches that reality is organized as a hierarchy with the One, the ultimate source of all being, at the top, and matter, the realm of multiplicity and change, at the bottom. The soul's journey is a movement upward, from the material to the spiritual, from the many to the one. This framework gives Augustine something Manichaeism could not. Evil is not a substance, not a thing with equal reality to good. Evil is privation, the absence of good, the corruption of something that was meant to be better. Darkness is real in our experience, but it is not a thing. It is the absence of light. In the same way, evil is real in our experience, but it is not a substance. It is the corruption of good, the twisting of what was meant for better purposes. This solves one of Augustine's deepest intellectual problems. If God created everything, and everything God created is good, where does evil come from? The Neoplatonic answer: God did not create evil. God created free beings, and those free beings can choose to turn away from their true good, to seek lesser goods as ultimate goods, to disorder their loves. Evil enters through the misuse of freedom, not through creation itself. Augustine sees immediately that this is intellectually superior to the Manichaean solution. It does not require two equal and opposite gods. It does not make matter intrinsically evil. It preserves divine goodness while accounting for genuine evil in the world. But intellectual understanding is not enough. Augustine knows the answer now. He can explain where evil comes from, but he is still doing evil. He is still choosing lesser goods over higher goods. His will remains divided. Knowing the truth has not set him free. This is perhaps Augustine's most troubling discovery. He has spent his entire adult life assuming that his problem was intellectual. If he could just understand the truth, he would naturally live according to it. But now he sees something more disturbing. His mind can be convinced while his will remains enslaved. He can know what is right and still do what is wrong, not from ignorance, but from some deeper disorder in his nature. The second thing that happens is he begins attending the sermons of Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Augustine goes initially for professional reasons. Ambrose is a skilled orator, and Augustine wants to study his technique. He is listening to how Ambrose speaks, not to what he is saying, but slowly, inevitably, the content starts to penetrate. Ambrose reads the Bible allegorically, finding deeper spiritual meanings beneath the surface of the text. The crude stories that had repelled Augustine suddenly reveal depths he had not suspected. The God of the Old Testament, when read through Ambrose's interpretive framework, is not a petty tyrant, but the source of all goodness, working through human history toward purposes that transcend any individual moment. Augustine finds his objections to Christianity crumbling one by one. The intellectual obstacles are being removed. The Neoplatonic framework has given him a way to think about God that makes philosophical sense. Ambrose's preaching has shown him that the Bible is not the simple-minded text he once dismissed. But still, he does not convert, because the real obstacle is not intellectual, it is volitional. It is not that he does not know what he should do, it is that he does not want to do it. And what he does not want to do, above all, is give up his sexual relationship with his mistress. This is where the rubber meets the road. Christianity demands chastity outside of marriage. If Augustine becomes a Christian, he will have to embrace celibacy or enter into a proper marriage. But he cannot marry his mistress. She is of a lower social class. Marriage to her would end his career prospects, limit his children's future, cut him off from the aristocratic circles he has worked so hard to enter. His mother Monica, ever practical even in her piety, arranges a suitable marriage for him to a girl from a good family. There is only one problem. The girl is not yet of marriageable age. Augustine will have to wait 2 years. And so his mistress is sent away. After 13 years together, after bearing his son, after building a life with him, she is dismissed. Augustine does not tell us her name. He does not tell us what she felt. But he does tell us something revealing. She returns to Africa, vowing never to be with another man. And Augustine, bereft, takes another mistress almost immediately. This is the moment when Augustine sees the chains most clearly. He does not want the first woman gone. He did not want to hurt her, but he was willing to do so for the sake of social advancement. And then, unable to wait 2 years for marriage, unable to embrace the celibacy Christianity demands, he immediately falls into the same pattern with someone else. He is a slave. That is the word that keeps coming to mind. A slave to habit, to desire, to patterns formed over years of indulgence. He knows what he should do. He wants, in some abstract way, to want what he should want. But the wanting is not enough. His will is divided against itself. Augustine begins reading Paul's letters with new understanding. Paul writes about the war within, about knowing the right but doing the wrong. I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. This is Augustine's experience exactly. The problem is not ignorance. The problem is a will that cannot align itself with the truth it knows. His friend Simplicianus tells him the story of Victorinus, a famous Roman philosopher and rhetorician who had converted to Christianity late in life. Victorinus had studied Christianity for years, had become convinced intellectually of its truth, but had delayed public conversion out of pride and fear of what his peers would think. Finally, he made his confession of faith publicly and found liberation in the very act he had so feared. The story moves Augustine deeply. Here is someone like himself, someone with reputation and prestige to lose, someone whose pride was the last barrier to conversion. And Victorinus had found that the barrier, once crossed, was not nearly as substantial as it had seemed from the other side. Then another friend, Pontitianus, visits, and tells Augustine an even more dramatic story. He speaks of Antony of the desert, a young Egyptian who had heard the gospel command to sell all and give to the poor, and had done exactly that. Antony had given away his inheritance, gone into the desert as a hermit, and lived a life of prayer and radical simplicity. His story had spread throughout the Christian world, inspiring countless others to similar lives of renunciation. Pontitianus then tells of two of his own friends, imperial officials just like Augustine, who had been reading about Antony. Right there, in the middle of their reading, they had suddenly decided to give up everything, to abandon their careers and prospects, to dedicate themselves entirely to God. No gradual process, no extended deliberation. Just a moment of clarity followed by immediate, total commitment. Augustine is cut to the heart. Here are people no better than him, people who started from the same place, who made the leap he keeps avoiding. What is stopping him? He knows the truth. He believes in God. He recognizes his need for grace. Why then is he still chained to his old life? The crisis is coming to a head. The intellectual barriers are gone. The social pressures remain, but they are not insurmountable. The real barrier is within himself, in a will that wants to want something it does not yet actually want. This is Augustine's darkest moment. To know the good and be unable to do it, to see the chains and be unable to break them, to long for freedom and remain enslaved. The restless heart has found truth, but truth alone has not brought rest. What Augustine needs is not more knowledge but transformation, not new information but new life, not intellectual certainty but the power to align his will with what his mind has come to know. And transformation, as he is about to discover, does not come gradually or through incremental effort. It comes in moments of crisis, when the accumulated pressure of years suddenly finds its release, when grace breaks through the barriers we have spent a lifetime constructing, when God takes the initiative we have been unable to take ourselves. The garden is waiting. The moment is approaching. Everything in Augustine's life has been leading to this point, though he does not know it yet. It is late summer, 386. Augustine is in Milan and something has to give. The tension has become unbearable. He knows what he needs to do. He believes Christianity is true. He accepts that he needs to change his life, but he cannot seem to make himself do it. The gap between intellectual assent and actual transformation feels infinite. His friend Alypius is with him. Alypius has been Augustine's student, then his colleague, now his friend. They share everything, or almost everything. Alypius does not fully understand the war raging inside Augustine's soul, but he knows something is terribly wrong. After Pontitianus leaves, after hearing those stories of sudden total conversion, Augustine cannot contain himself any longer. He turns to Alypius with wild eyes. "What is wrong with us?" he cries. What is this that you have heard? Unlearned people are rising up and taking heaven by storm. And here we are with all our learning, stuck in flesh and blood. He rushes out into the garden behind the house. Alypius follows, concerned, not speaking, just present. Augustine is beyond speech, beyond rational discourse. He is in the grip of something primal, desperate. He pulls at his hair, strikes his forehead, wraps his arms around his knees. The tears come in torrents. He is weeping not for loss, but for waste, for years spent running in circles, for pleasure that brought no peace, for success that meant nothing, for a brilliant mind yoked to a divided will. He is weeping for the chains he has forged himself, link by link, through years of choosing lesser goods over the highest good. And then, out of the depths of his agony, a prayer breaks through. It is the prayer of Psalm 13, the cry of the desperate soul. How long, O Lord, how long will you be angry forever? Do not remember my past sins. How long? How long has Monica been praying? 30 years. How long has Augustine been running? His entire adult life. How long has the restless heart been seeking rest in all the wrong places? Too long. Far too long. How long? Tomorrow and tomorrow? Why not now? Why not this very hour make an end to my uncleanness? This is the question that cuts through everything. Why not now? What is he waiting for? Permission? He has it. Strength? That will never come from within himself. Certainty. He has as much as he is likely to get. What is stopping him is not external obstacles, but his own unwillingness to let go of the life he knows, for a life he can barely imagine. He says these things to himself, and he weeps with the most bitter contrition of heart. And then, suddenly, he hears something. A voice. A child's voice from somewhere beyond the garden wall. Singing, or chanting, the same phrase over and over. Tolle lege, take up and read, take up and read. Augustine stops. He listens. The voice continues, that strange sing-song repetition. Take up and read, take up and read. He sits up, wiping his eyes. He looks around. There are no children visible. The voice seems to come from nowhere, or from everywhere. Is it a game children play? He has never heard such a game. Is it a voice from beyond the natural order? He does not know, but he remembers something. He remembers the story of Antony of the desert, how Antony's conversion came through hearing the gospel read in church. Go, sell all you have, give to the poor, and come follow me. Antony had heard it as a direct command to him, personally, and had immediately obeyed. Could this be similar? Could this mysterious voice be a sign, a divine prompting? Augustine stands. There on the bench nearby is a codex, a book of Paul's epistles. He had been reading it earlier with Alypius. He walks over, picks it up, decides to open it at random and read the first passage his eyes fall upon. He opens the book. His eyes fall on Romans 13:14. Not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarrelling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh, to gratify its desires. Augustine reads the words once. The sentence ends. And in that ending, something in Augustine ends as well, or rather, something begins. He will write later, trying to describe what happened in that moment. I neither wished nor needed to read further. Instantly, at the end of this sentence, a light of relief from all anxiety flooded into my heart. All the shadows of doubt were dispelled. It is not that the words contain new information. It is not that Paul is saying something Augustine has never heard before. He has heard it all. He knows what Christianity teaches about purity, about turning from sin, about putting on Christ like you would put on new clothes. But somehow, in this moment, in this garden, after this mysterious voice, after years of resistance and months of crisis, the words do not just inform his mind, they transform his will. The divided will becomes unified. The chains fall away. The restlessness, in one astonishing instant, finds its rest. Augustine closes the book. He looks at Alypius. His face must show something remarkable, because Alypius immediately asks what happened. Augustine points to the passage. Alypius reads it, and then reads on to the next verse. As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him. Alypius takes this as his own sign. If Augustine is converting, so will he. Where his teacher goes, he will follow. They go inside. They find Monica. Augustine tells her what has happened, and Monica, who has prayed for 30 years, who has followed her son from Africa to Rome to Milan, who has wept rivers of tears before God, receives the news with profound joy. You have won, Augustine tells her, though he knows the winning was not hers or his, but grace working through them both. Later, much later, scholars will debate what actually happened in that garden. Did Augustine hear a real child's voice, or was it an auditory hallucination brought on by emotional distress? Did the conversion happen in that instant, or had it been building for years and this was just the final breakthrough? Did the story happen exactly as Augustine tells it, or has he shaped the narrative for literary and theological effect? These questions miss something essential. Whether the voice was natural or supernatural, whether the conversion was instant or gradual, something undeniably happened. A man who could not change, changed. A will that was enslaved became free. A heart that could not rest found peace. This is what conversion means, not just for Augustine, but for anyone. It is not primarily about adopting new beliefs, though beliefs change. It is not primarily about following new rules, though behavior changes. It is about a fundamental reorientation of the will, a shift in what the heart loves most deeply. For years, Augustine's heart had loved pleasure, success, intellectual triumph. These loves were not evil in themselves, but they had been disordered, sought as ultimate goods when they could only be penultimate goods. In the garden, his loves are reordered, not destroyed, but put in their proper place. He does not stop being brilliant or enjoying beauty or seeking truth, but these things now orbit around a new center. God is no longer one interest among many. God becomes the sun around which everything else revolves. The weeks following his conversion are spent in retreat. Augustine, Alypius, and several other friends withdraw to a country villa to study, pray, and prepare for baptism. Here, Augustine writes his first philosophical dialogues, working out in systematic form the insights that have been forming in his mind. Here he has deep conversations about happiness, about certainty, about the nature of evil and the structure of reality. On the vigil of Easter, April 25th, 387, Bishop Ambrose baptizes Augustine. Ambrose, whose sermons first began to break through Augustine's resistance. Ambrose, who showed him that Christianity could satisfy not just the heart, but the mind. Ambrose, who represents the intellectual tradition of Christian faith that Augustine is about to spend the rest of his life developing and defending. Monica is there, of course. She has lived to see what she never doubted would happen. Her prayers are answered. Her tears have watered seeds that are now bearing fruit. She is at peace in a way Augustine has never seen her before. A few months later, on the journey back to Africa, Monica dies. She is 56 years old. On her deathbed, she tells Augustine that she had lived only to see him become a Christian. Now that this has happened, she has no more reason to remain. She dies content, her life's purpose fulfilled. Augustine's grief is complex. He has lost his mother, his constant companion, his most faithful intercessor, but he has lost her as a Christian now, with the hope of resurrection, with the confidence that death is not the end. This grief is different from the grief he felt when his friend died years before in Thagaste. That grief had been total, devastating, without hope. This grief is shot through with light. The conversion in the garden was not the end of Augustine's journey. In many ways, it was the beginning. Because now he has to work out what it means to live as a Christian, not just in his private devotions, but in the world, in community, in leadership, in intellectual debate. But something fundamental has shifted. The heart that was restless has found its rest, not complete rest, not total peace, not the absence of struggle, but rest in the sense of having found the right direction, having oriented itself toward the true north of God's love. The garden conversion is the hinge on which Augustine's life turns. Everything before was searching, running, avoiding. Everything after is returning, resting, witnessing to others about the rest he has found. But the conversion also raises as many questions as it answers. If Augustine is now at peace, if his will is no longer divided, why does he still struggle with temptation? If God's grace is sufficient, why does he still feel the pull of old desires? If he has found truth, why does so much remain mysterious? These questions will occupy Augustine for the rest of his life, and in wrestling with them, he will develop insights about human nature, about sin and grace, about time and memory, about the structure of reality itself that will shape Western thought for the next 1600 years. The garden gave him peace, but it also gave him a new starting point for deeper and more difficult questions. Because once you have found rest, you want to understand it. You want to know what it means, where it comes from, how it works. You want to help others find it too. Augustine the seeker has become Augustine the witness. But the witness is still, in his own way, a seeker. Just seeking different things now. Not peace instead of restlessness, but understanding of the peace he has found. Not answers to replace doubt, but deeper questions that arise from faith. The conversion was not an ending. It was a transfiguration of the journey itself. After the garden, after the tears, after the moment of surrender, Augustine faces a question that has haunted him since his youth. If God is perfectly good and perfectly powerful, why does evil exist? He has experienced conversion, but intellectual problems do not vanish simply because the heart has found peace. In fact, the opposite happens. Now that he trusts in God's goodness, the problem of evil becomes more urgent, not less. For 9 years, Augustine had found refuge in the Manichaean answer. 2 gods, 2 forces, light and darkness locked in eternal combat. Evil explained by making it co-equal with good, neither one ultimately victorious, both existing from eternity. It was neat, clean, intellectually satisfying in its symmetry. But Augustine now knows this answer is false. There is one God, not 2. Creation is good, fundamentally good, because it comes from a good creator. The Genesis account is not naive mythology, but profound truth. God looked at what he had made and called it very good. Every level of creation, from the highest angels to the smallest grain of sand, exists as an expression of divine generosity. Yet evil is real, devastatingly, undeniably real. Augustine knows this from experience, not just from theory. He has done evil. He has felt its corrupting power. He has seen innocent. People suffer, good people destroyed, the wicked prospering while the righteous mourn. How can these 2 truths coexist? A good God and a world full of suffering? The breakthrough comes through his reading of the Neoplatonists, particularly Plotinus. But Augustine takes what he learns and transforms it through Christian faith. The insight changes everything. Evil is not a thing. It is not a substance. It does not exist in the way that good exists. Think about darkness, Augustine suggests. You experience darkness as real. You stumble in it, fear it, long for light to dispel it. But what is darkness, actually? It is not a thing that exists. It is the absence of light. Where light is, darkness cannot be. Darkness has no independent existence. It is a privation, a lack, an absence of what should be there. Or consider cold. You feel cold, you shiver in it, you can die from it. But cold is not a thing. It is the absence or reduction of heat. Heat is what exists. Cold is what you experience when heat is absent or insufficient. Evil works the same way, Augustine argues. It is real in our experience, but it is not a substance or force with independent existence. Evil is the privation of good, the corruption of what was meant to be better, the twisting of something that was created good toward purposes it was never meant to serve. Every evil you can name, Augustine claims, is a good gone wrong, courage twisted into recklessness, love distorted into possessiveness, desire for pleasure divorced from its proper context and elevated to ultimate concern, pride taking the legitimate good of self-respect and inflating it until it crowds out love for God and neighbour. This means something revolutionary. God did not create evil. God created beings, and those beings are good insofar as they exist. Even the devil, Augustine insists, is not purely evil. As a being, as something that exists, he retains a measure of goodness simply by continuing to exist. His evil consists not in what he is, but in what he lacks, what he has chosen to reject. The angelic nature is good. The rebellion against God is the privation of the goodness that nature was meant to express. Think about a diseased eye, Augustine suggests. The eye itself is good. Sight is good. But disease corrupts the eye, damages its capacity to do what eyes are meant to do. The disease is not a positive thing added to the eye. It is the corruption of the eye, the privation of its proper health. Similarly, sin is the disease of the will, not something added to human nature, but the corruption of what human nature was meant to be. This solves the logical problem. If evil is not a thing God created, then God is not the author of evil. Evil enters through the misuse of what God did create, namely free creatures with the capacity to choose. But why would a good God create beings capable of choosing evil? Why build freedom into the system if freedom opens the door to such catastrophic consequences? Here, Augustine makes a move that will resonate through Christian thought for centuries. The possibility of evil is the price of genuine goodness. Love that is coerced is not love. Virtue that is programmed is not virtue. For created beings to have real goodness, they must have real freedom. And real freedom means the genuine possibility of choosing wrongly. God could have created a universe of automatons who never sinned because they never chose anything. But such beings would not be good in any meaningful sense. They would be mechanisms, not persons. They could not love God because love requires freedom. They could not grow in virtue because virtue requires struggle and choice. The greater good, Augustine argues, is a universe containing free beings capable of genuine relationship, even if that freedom creates the possibility of rebellion. God judged that a world with humans and angels, with all the risks that free will entails, is better than a world of perfect order, but no genuine love. But what about suffering that results from choices we did not make? What about children born with diseases, natural disasters that kill thousands, the innocent caught in wars started by others? This is where Augustine's doctrine of original sin comes into play, and it remains his most controversial teaching. Adam and Eve, the first humans, were created good and free. They lived in paradise, in right relationship with God, with each other, with the creation around them. They had everything needed for flourishing, but they chose to rebel, to grasp at a kind of autonomy that was never meant for creatures, to decide for themselves what is good and evil, rather than receiving this knowledge from God. The fall, Augustine argues, was not just a mistake or a bad example. It was a catastrophic event that damaged human nature itself. Adam and Eve did not just commit an isolated sin. They introduced disorder into the entire creation over which they had been given stewardship. Their will became corrupted, bent away from God and towards self. And this corruption passes to all their descendants. We are seminally present in Adam, Augustine claims. When he fell, we fell in him. This is why we inherit not just the guilt of his sin, but the corrupted nature that makes us incapable of not sinning. We are born with a will that is damaged, desires that are disordered, loves that are confused about their proper objects. This explains why even good people sin, why moral improvement is so difficult, why we know what we should do and still fail to do it. It is not just ignorance or weakness of will, it is the fundamental damage to our nature caused by the fall. Natural evil, Augustine argues, follows from this same source. When humans sinned, They did not just damage themselves, they damaged their relationship with the creation they were meant to steward. Death enters the world through sin. Disease, decay, natural disasters all flow from the fundamental disorder introduced when humans rejected their proper relationship with God. This is a hard doctrine, perhaps the hardest in Augustine's entire system. It means that suffering is, in some ultimate sense, the consequence of sin, even when the sufferer is innocent of any personal wrongdoing. The child born with cancer, the villagers killed by an earthquake, the victims of famine, all suffer ultimately because of the fall, because human sin introduced corruption into the entire created order. Critics through the centuries have asked, is this fair? How can God hold people accountable for a choice made thousands of years before they were born? How can we be responsible for a corrupted nature we did not choose? Augustine's answer appeals to divine wisdom beyond our complete understanding. God sees differently than we see. God views all of human history as a single tapestry, where individual threads make sense only in relation to the whole pattern. What seems unjust from our limited perspective may serve purposes we cannot fully grasp. Moreover, Augustine insists, we do make real choices. We are not mere puppets. The corrupted will is still a will. We genuinely choose our sins, even if our nature makes us inclined towards sin. The punishment fits the crime, and the crime is real, not just the inevitable working out of inherited corruption. But Augustine is not content to leave the problem at this intellectual level. He is not just a philosopher playing with abstract concepts. He is a pastor, a bishop, someone responsible for shepherding real people through real suffering. And here his response shifts from argument to mystery, from logic to trust. He writes a sermon, preserved for us across 16 centuries. His congregation has been devastated by the sack of Rome. Many have lost everything. Some have been killed, others traumatized. They are asking the question that humans have always asked in the face of catastrophe. Why? Why us? Why now? Where is God? Augustine does not offer them a neat logical proof. Instead, he points them to Christ. God has not abandoned humanity in its suffering. God has entered into suffering. The incarnation means that God knows from the inside what it means to be human, to suffer, to face injustice, to die. Christ handed over his flesh to be killed, Augustine preaches, not to give us a philosophical answer to evil, but to show us that nothing evil can do to us can separate us from God's love. He showed you in his resurrection what you ought to be hoping for at the end of this age. The appeal is not to logical necessity, but to divine love. The answer to evil is not an explanation, but a person. Not a theodicy, but a God who suffers with us, and then bursts through death to show that death is not the final word. Augustine himself seems to recognize that his intellectual solutions, however brilliant, do not fully satisfy. Evil remains, in the final analysis, a mystery. Not because it is illogical, but because it is absurd. It should not exist. It exists only as the corruption of what should not be corrupted. It is real, but parasitic, powerful, but ultimately self-defeating. What Augustine offers is not the final word, but a framework for living with the question. Evil is not equal to good. God is not responsible for evil. Humans introduced evil through the misuse of freedom. Creation groans under the weight of this corruption, but is not abandoned. God works through human history toward redemption, toward the restoration of the original goodness that sin corrupted. For those listening tonight, wrestling with your own questions about suffering, Augustine's approach might offer something valuable. Not certainty, perhaps, but a way of holding the questions, a way of acknowledging the reality of evil without making it ultimate, without giving it more power than it actually has. Evil is real, but it is derivative, parasitic, temporary. Good is more fundamental, more deeply woven into the structure of reality. And the good God, who made all things good, has not abandoned creation to the consequences of sin. The same power that brought being out of non-being can bring healing out of brokenness, resurrection out of death, cosmos out of chaos. As you prepare for rest, you carry with you whatever sufferings mark your own life. Augustine does not offer you an answer that makes the suffering disappear, or makes sense in some neat way, but he offers you a vision of reality in which suffering is not the ultimate truth. Goodness is more fundamental than evil. Love is more powerful than hate. Being is stronger than nothingness. The problem of evil remains a problem, but it is not a problem that makes faith impossible. It is a problem that faith holds within a larger mystery, the mystery of a God who enters into suffering rather than explaining it away, who joins us in the darkness rather than simply turning on the lights from a safe distance. And that perhaps is more comforting than any logical proof could ever be. Around the year 397, 11 years after his conversion, Augustine begins writing the most unusual autobiography in Western literature. The Confessions is not a simple life story. It is a prayer, a philosophical meditation, a theological exploration, all woven together into something that had never quite existed before. He writes in the second person, addressing God directly, as if having an intimate conversation with the one who already knows everything he is confessing. Late have I loved you, beauty so ancient and so new. Late have I loved you. These are not words about God, but words to God, written for public consumption yet intensely personal. The first 9 books trace his journey from infancy through conversion, but Book 10 takes a radical turn. Here Augustine turns inward, exploring the vast terrain of human consciousness itself. And at the centre of this exploration stands memory, that mysterious capacity that makes us who we are. I come to the fields and spacious palaces of my memory, Augustine writes. The metaphor is not accidental. Memory is like a great building, a cathedral of consciousness, with endless halls and chambers, some brightly lit, others shrouded in shadow, still others locked away in darkness waiting to be discovered. Consider what memory does, Augustine marvels. When you remember your childhood home, where is that home? Not in the physical space where it once stood, which may have been torn down or changed beyond recognition. The home exists now in your memory, a kind of inner space that preserves what physical space cannot. But it is not just images that memory contains. You remember facts, concepts, emotions, skills. You remember mathematics, language, the faces of loved ones. You remember feelings you once had, but do not feel now. Right now, in this moment, you can remember being happy without currently being happy. You can remember pain without feeling pain. Memory somehow separates the information from the sensation. This is strange when you think about it. How can you have the memory of joy without the joy itself? The memory is not neutral information. It carries something of the quality of the original experience. Yet it is not identical to that experience. You know you once felt joy, but the knowing is different from the feeling. Memory makes identity possible across time. The person you are now remembers being the person you were 10 years ago. But are they the same person? Your body has completely replaced most of its cells. Your beliefs have changed. Your experiences have accumulated. What makes you the same person except memory's ability to connect present self to past self? Augustine probes deeper. Memory contains not just what you consciously remember, but vast stores of forgotten things. You learned your native language as a child, and now you speak it without conscious effort. The grammar rules, the vocabulary, all of it is in your memory somewhere, even though you never deliberately recall it. Sometimes a smell or a sound triggers a memory you did not know you had. The neural pathways fire, and suddenly you are transported to a moment decades past. Where was that memory in the intervening years? It existed in some form, dormant, waiting for the right stimulus to awaken it. More mysteriously still, memory contains abstractions. You remember the concept of justice, but justice itself is not a thing you can see or touch. You remember mathematical truths that exist independently of any particular calculation. Where do these abstract memories come from? How can memory contain what has never existed in physical space? Here Augustine edges toward Platonic territory. Perhaps memory is not just storage, but recognition. Perhaps when we learn mathematical truth, we are not discovering something new, but remembering something the soul already knows in some deep, preconscious way. The famous answer is hidden in the question itself, suggesting that knowledge is always partly remembering. But Augustine pushes beyond Plato. Memory is not just the repository of past experiences or pre-existing knowledge. Memory is where we meet God. This is the most startling claim. God dwells in memory, or perhaps more accurately, memory is one of the places where we encounter divine presence. How can this be? God transcends time, transcends space, transcends all created things. Yet Augustine finds God in memory's depths. Where did I find you so as to learn of you, if not in yourself above me? The journey inward becomes a journey upward. The exploration of inner space opens onto transcendent mystery. When you search your memory for God, you are not looking for a memory like other memories. God is not a fact you once learned, an experience you once had. God is the one in whom all facts and experiences exist. Memory itself exists in God before it exists in us. We remember God not as object, but as the light by which we remember anything at all. This connects to Augustine's understanding of truth. When you recognize a mathematical truth, you are not creating that truth. You are discovering it. But where was it before you discovered it? It must exist in some eternal realm, not dependent on human minds for its reality. And that eternal realm, Augustine believes, is the divine mind itself. Truth exists eternally in God. When we know truth, we participate in God's knowledge. Similarly with beauty, you recognize beauty when you encounter it. But how do you recognize it unless you already have some standard of beauty against which to measure particular beautiful things? That standard cannot be derived purely from experience, because particular beautiful things are imperfect and various. The standard must come from beyond, from the perfect beauty that all particular beauties reflect. Memory, truth, beauty, all lead back to God. The inward journey is simultaneously an upward journey. Self-knowledge and knowledge of God are not separate quests, but two aspects of the same search. But Augustine is equally aware of memory's deceptions. We misremember. We edit our past to make ourselves look better. We suppress painful memories and embellish pleasant ones. Memory is not a simple recording device, but an active, constructive process that shapes the past, even as it preserves it. This is why Augustine writes his Confessions, not to provide objective historical record, but to examine his life before God, to bring the depths of memory into the light of divine truth where distortions can be corrected. Lord, let me know myself, let me know you. The double knowledge, self and God, each illuminating the other. He confesses sins he committed decades ago, sins that have been forgiven but still need to be acknowledged. The confession serves multiple purposes. It gives glory to God's mercy. It provides a model for other sinners who think their sins too great for forgiveness. It helps Augustine himself understand his own journey. And it probes the mystery of why we sin, what leads rational beings to choose what they know is destructive. The famous theft of pears returns here, that seemingly trivial incident that revealed something terrifying about human nature. Augustine stole not from need, but from the pleasure of doing wrong. The sin had no ulterior motive, no practical purpose. It was evil for evil's sake. And this is what haunts him, because it suggests that sin is not just weakness or ignorance, but a positive perversity, a love of wrongdoing itself. Memory preserves this moment, forces Augustine to confront it again and again. He cannot explain it satisfactorily. He can only acknowledge it and throw himself on divine mercy. This is the proper use of memory, he suggests, not to justify ourselves, but to understand ourselves accurately enough to recognize our need for grace. Book 10 ends with a powerful passage about the threefold temptation that continues even after conversion: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Augustine examines how each still tempts him. Sexual desire, though conquered in action, still troubles his dreams. The love of beauty and pleasure still tugs at him in ambiguous ways. And pride, the most subtle and dangerous temptation, insinuates itself into even his best actions. He does not pretend to have achieved perfection. He does not claim that conversion solved everything. He remains a work in progress, a soul in process of being transformed. Memory witnesses to both the progress and the persistent struggle. And this honesty makes the confession so powerful. Augustine writes as someone who has found grace, but still needs grace daily. For those listening tonight, Augustine's exploration of memory might resonate with your own experience. You carry within you a vast storehouse of memories, some pleasant, some painful, some forgotten, until something awakens them. These memories make you who you are. They connect your present self to your past selves. They shape how you see the world and yourself. Augustine suggests that this memory is not just looking backward. It is also the place where you meet the eternal, where time touches timelessness, where the restless heart encounters the one in whom all hearts find rest. Memory is not just about the past. It is about presence, about the mysterious way the past continues to exist in the present through consciousness. As you prepare for sleep, your memory is already beginning the work it does every night, consolidating the day's experiences, processing emotions, strengthening some neural pathways while letting others fade. In sleep, memories shift and settle. Dreams weave fragments into strange new patterns. The vast palace of memory continues its work even when you are not conscious of it. Augustine would see in this a sign of divine providence, the memory that makes you who you are, that connects you across time, that allows you to know truth and recognize beauty. This memory points beyond itself to the source of all truth, all beauty, all being. "Late have I loved you," he wrote, addressing the beauty that is always ancient, yet always new. The journey through memory's cathedral becomes a journey home. In Book 11 of the Confessions, Augustine turns to a question that has puzzled philosophers since humans first became conscious of their existence in a changing world. What is time? He begins with startling honesty. What, then, is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to someone who asks, I do not know. This is not false modesty. Augustine genuinely understands the experience of time in some immediate way, but when he tries to articulate what time actually is, the understanding slips away like water through his fingers. The paradox goes deeper the more you think about it. We measure time. We speak confidently about long times and short times, about past and future, about things that happened quickly or slowly. But what exactly are we measuring? Consider the past. It no longer exists. Whatever happened yesterday is finished, gone, existing now only in memory. We cannot measure what no longer exists. We can remember the past, but the past itself is not available for measurement. Consider the future. It does not yet exist. Whatever will happen tomorrow is not yet real, existing only in anticipation or anxiety. We cannot measure what does not yet exist. We can imagine the future, but the future itself remains stubbornly unreal until it becomes present. This leaves us with the present. But what is the present? A year? That is too long, because it includes months that are already past, and months still to come. A month, a day, an hour, a minute, a second? The more you try to pin down the present moment, the smaller it becomes. Any duration you name immediately divides into parts, some of which have already passed and some of which have not yet arrived. If you push this logic far enough, you arrive at something disturbing. The present has no duration at all. It is not a slice of time, however thin. It is the knife edge between past and future, the constantly moving boundary that separates us from will be. And if the present has no duration, how can time consist of presence? How can we measure what has no extension? Augustine circles around this paradox from different angles. He observes that we cannot call time long or short unless we can measure it, but we can only measure what exists. The past does not exist, the future does not exist, and the present has no duration. So what are we measuring when we measure time? His solution is revolutionary, anticipating insights that modern philosophy and neuroscience are only now beginning to appreciate. Time, as we experience it, exists in the mind. Or more precisely, time exists as mental extension, the distension of consciousness across the three modes of present awareness. There is, Augustine argues, a present of past things. We call this memory. There is a present of present things. We call this attention or direct perception. And there is a present of future things. We call this expectation or anticipation. When you recite a poem, the words you have already spoken exist in your memory. The word you are currently speaking exists in your attention. The words you are about to speak exist in your expectation. All three exist simultaneously in your present consciousness. The past is present as memory. The future is present as anticipation. The present is present as attention. This explains how we experience duration. When you measure time, you are not measuring some external reality. You are measuring the impression that things make on your consciousness. You measure the span between what you remember and what you anticipate, held together by what you attend to in the present moment. Think about listening to a melody. The notes sound one after another, but you do not experience them as isolated events. You hear them as a melody precisely because your consciousness holds together the notes you just heard, the note currently sounding, and your anticipation of notes to come. The melody exists in the distension of your consciousness across these three presents. This is why time seems to pass at different speeds depending on what you are doing. When you are bored, focused on how slowly time is passing, your consciousness becomes painfully aware of its own distension. When you are absorbed in an activity, your consciousness is gathered into the present moment, and time seems to fly by. Augustine does not claim that time is merely subjective or illusory. External events really do occur in sequence. Physical change is real, but the experience of time as duration, as a continuous flow that we inhabit and measure, this arises from the nature of consciousness itself. This insight has profound implications. It suggests that time and consciousness are intimately connected. Creatures without consciousness might exist in time in some sense, but they do not experience time. They do not remember the past or anticipate the future. They simply exist in an eternal present moment, responding to stimuli without the extended awareness that characterizes human consciousness. It also explains why time seems uniquely human in some ways. Animals clearly respond to rhythms and patterns, but do they experience time as duration? Do they remember their past and project themselves into an imagined future? We cannot be certain, but Augustine's analysis suggests that the experience of time requires a particular kind of self-awareness that may be unique to rational beings. But Augustine does not stop with the psychology of time. He moves to theological implications. If time is bound up with consciousness, and consciousness requires a created, changing being, then God must exist outside of time in some fundamental way. God does not remember the past, because for God, all of history is present. God does not anticipate the future, because for God, what we call future is not yet to be, but already present. God does not experience duration or succession, because divine knowledge does not change. Everything that ever was, is, or will be exists in a single, eternal present in the divine consciousness. This eternal present is not the same as the knife-edge present we experience. Our present is the boundary between past and future. God's present is the simultaneous possession of all times without succession. What we experience in sequence, God knows all at once. Our lives are like a story being read one word at a time. From our perspective, the plot unfolds moment by moment. From God's perspective, the entire story is present simultaneously, beginning and end together. This has implications for divine foreknowledge and human freedom, issues Augustine will wrestle with in other works. If God knows what we will choose before we choose it, are we really free? Augustine's answer involves distinguishing between temporal causation and eternal knowledge. God's knowledge does not cause our choices any more than your memory of yesterday's choices caused those choices when you made them. God sees all of time spread out like a landscape seen from a mountaintop, but seeing does not determine what is seen. For those struggling to fall asleep tonight, Augustine's reflections on time offer a strange comfort. The time that troubles you, the time you feel you have wasted or lost, the time you fear running out, this time exists only in the distension of your consciousness. Past regrets are memories you carry in the present. Future anxieties are anticipations you experience now. The only reality is this present moment, and this moment is always opening onto the next. As sleep approaches, you feel the distension of consciousness beginning to relax. The tight grip on past and future loosens. Memory and anticipation fade into the background. You sink into a more immediate present, and then even that dissolves into unconsciousness. Yet you do not cease to exist. You simply cease to experience the distension that creates the sensation of time passing, and when you wake tomorrow, consciousness will gather itself again, pulling together memory of yesterday and anticipation of the day ahead, creating once more the experience of existing in time. This rhythm of distension and relaxation, of engagement with time and release from time, mirrors something about human nature itself. We are temporal beings, but we are made for eternity. We live in time, but we are oriented toward timelessness. Augustine's reflections on time still influence contemporary debates in physics and philosophy of mind. What is the relationship between subjective time and objective time? Between the time we experience and the time measured by clocks? Between the flowing present and the static space-time of relativity theory? These questions remain live precisely because Augustine articulated the problem so clearly 16 centuries ago. As you surrender to sleep, let the mystery of time hold you gently. The past is gone, but preserved in memory. The future is unknown, but shaped by anticipation. And the present is the only moment that exists, constantly renewing itself, constantly opening onto what comes next. In God's eternal present, all your moments exist simultaneously, held together by a love that transcends time while working within it. Rest easy in the flow of time that carries you from yesterday through today into tomorrow. It is all one movement, all one gift, all one gracious unfolding of the divine invitation to exist, to experience, to grow, to become more fully what you were always meant to be. The mystery remains mysterious, but mystery need not be frightening. Sometimes it can be a doorway into peace. The year is 410, and the unthinkable has happened. Rome, the eternal city, the center of civilization, the symbol of order and power, has been sacked by barbarian armies. Alaric the Visigoth has breached the walls, and his troops have spent 3 days pillaging the city that was supposed to last forever. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Rome had not been conquered by a foreign enemy in 800 years. The city was more than a political capital. It was an idea, a promise, a foundation upon which the entire Mediterranean world was built. Now that foundation has cracked, and no one knows if the world will hold together. Predictably, fingers point toward Christians. Rome was great when it worshipped the old gods. Now that Christianity has become the dominant religion, now that the traditional religious practices have been suppressed, the gods are angry. They have withdrawn their protection. This disaster is the price of abandoning the gods who made Rome great. Augustine, now a bishop in North Africa, hears these accusations, and he responds with one of the most ambitious works ever attempted. Over the next 13 years, he will write The City of God, a work that is part history, part theology, part philosophy, part political theory. It is nothing less than a comprehensive Christian interpretation of human history, from creation to final judgment. The framework is elegant in its simplicity, profound in its implications. All of human history, Augustine argues, can be understood as the story of two cities, not physical cities, but spiritual communities defined by what they love. The city of man is founded on love of self to the contempt of God. The city of God is founded on love of God to the contempt of self. These two loves create two cities, intermingled throughout history but fundamentally distinct in their orientation, their values, their ultimate destiny. Do not misunderstand Augustine here. He is not simply equating the city of God with the church and the city of man with the state. Both cities have members in every human institution. You can be baptized and still belong to the city of man if your heart's deepest love is directed toward yourself. You can hold political office and belong to the city of God if your service is oriented toward genuine common good rather than personal advancement. The difference is not visible to human eyes. Only God knows who truly belongs to which city. But the difference is real and determinative. What you love most deeply shapes everything else about you. Your deepest loves create your identity more surely than your nationality, your profession, your family connections. The city of man is not entirely bad. It pursues genuine goods: peace, justice, prosperity, culture, family life. These are real goods, reflections of divine goodness in creation. But the city of man pursues them as ultimate goods, as ends in themselves, rather than penultimate goods meant to serve higher purposes. This leads to a characteristic disorder. When temporal goods are treated as ultimate, they become idols. The pursuit of peace through strength leads to endless military expansion. The desire for prosperity leads to exploitation and inequality. The love of culture becomes cultural pride that despises other cultures. Family love becomes tribal identity that views outsiders as threats or enemies. Rome itself is a perfect example. It achieved extraordinary things: law, infrastructure, art, literature, a political system that endured for centuries. But these achievements came at tremendous cost. Military conquest, slavery, brutal entertainments, systematic oppression. Rome's greatness was built on foundations of violence and exploitation. Moreover, Rome's fall proves that earthly kingdoms cannot provide ultimate security. Every empire rises and falls. Every civilization has its day and then passes away. If you place your ultimate hope in any earthly city, you are placing it in something that will inevitably disappoint and eventually perish. The city of God, by contrast, orients all temporal goods toward an eternal purpose. Peace is good, but lasting peace comes only from right relationship with God. Justice is good, but true justice requires recognizing God's justice as the standard. Prosperity is good, but only when wealth serves the well-being of all and points beyond material comfort to spiritual flourishing. The city of God exists as pilgrims in the earthly city. Christians are not meant to withdraw from society, but to engage with it, to work for temporal goods while remembering they are not ultimate goods. We participate in politics, economics, culture, but without placing ultimate hope in any of these spheres. This creates a particular stance toward political power. Government has a legitimate role, Augustine argues. It maintains order, administers justice, protects the vulnerable, punishes wrongdoers. These are real goods that serve genuine human needs. Christians should participate in government, should work for justice and peace, should be good citizens. But government cannot save. Political solutions cannot heal the fundamental disorder in human nature. Laws can restrain evil, but cannot transform hearts. Power can compel external compliance, but cannot create genuine love or virtue. This means Christians should be simultaneously more engaged and less invested than others in political life. More engaged because we recognize that political decisions have real consequences for human flourishing. Less invested because we know that no political program will usher in the kingdom of God. Augustine develops what becomes known as just war theory here. He acknowledges that sometimes love of neighbor requires the use of force to protect innocent people from aggression. But he insists that war is always tragic, always a sign of the disorder introduced by sin. Peace achieved through violence is a lesser good than peace achieved through justice and mutual respect. War may sometimes be necessary, but it is never good in itself. The two cities are intermingled throughout history, making judgment complex. The church itself contains members of both cities, wheat and tares growing together until the harvest. Christian emperors can serve the city of man if their power is directed towards self-glorification. Pagan philosophers can serve the city of God if their pursuit of truth is genuine. This creates what some have called Augustinian realism. Christians should not be naive about human sinfulness or idealistic about what politics can achieve. Power corrupts, even in Christian hands. Institutions drift towards self-preservation. The disorder introduced by sin affects everything, including the church. But Christians should also not be cynical or despairing. God works through human history, even through the failures and sins. The city of God advances not despite the city of man, but in some mysterious way through it, the way wheat grows through soil that also feeds weeds. History is not cyclical, Augustine insists, contrary to the pagan philosophers who saw time as eternal return. History is linear, purposeful, moving toward a definite end. Creation, fall, redemption, judgment. The story has a beginning in God's creative act and an end in God's final judgment. In between, the two cities grow together toward the harvest, when they will be finally separated. This means history has meaning. Your choices matter. The societies you build, the justice you pursue, the love you show, all of it contributes to the great story God is telling through human history. Nothing is wasted, though much is tragic. God can bring good even from evil, not by making evil good, but by weaving it into patterns of redemption. Rome's fall is not the end of the world. It is one more episode in the long story of earthly cities rising and falling, while God's city endures. Christians need not despair when political systems collapse or cultures decline. Our ultimate citizenship is elsewhere. Our final hope is in a kingdom that cannot be shaken. For those listening tonight in whatever earthly city you call home, Augustine's vision offers perspective. The politics that consume so much attention, the cultural conflicts that generate such heat, these matter, but they are not ultimate. Work for justice, pursue peace, serve the common good. But do not place ultimate hope in any human institution. You are a pilgrim, passing through the earthly city on your way to a better country. This does not mean withdrawal or indifference. Pilgrims interact with the lands through which they travel, respecting local customs, contributing where they can. But pilgrims do not forget their destination. Their identity is shaped by where they are going, not just where they currently are. As sleep approaches, let go of the anxieties tied to earthly cities, to politics and power, and the endless struggle for control. These things matter in their sphere. Tomorrow you will engage with them again, but tonight rest in the confidence that a greater city endures, a kingdom that will outlast every empire, a peace that transcends every political settlement. The restless heart finds rest not in fixing the earthly city, but in seeking the heavenly one. Not by withdrawing from the world, but by engaging it with right priorities, loving its goods without worshipping them, working for its improvement while knowing its limitations. In God's city, perfect justice reigns, perfect peace flows from perfect love. Every tear will be wiped away, every wrong righted, every longing satisfied. Not yet, not fully. But the city is real, its citizenship offered freely, its future certain. Rest tonight as a citizen of that city, temporarily residing in this one, working for whatever good can be achieved here while awaiting the perfect good that can only be achieved there. In the quiet monastery gardens of North Africa, a British monk named Pelagius picks up a copy of Augustine's Confessions. He reads it with growing alarm. This book, which has inspired thousands toward conversion, strikes Pelagius as profoundly dangerous. The passage that troubles him most is Augustine's prayer. Grant what you command, and command what you will. In other words, God, give me the power to obey your commands, then command whatever you choose. To Pelagius, this sounds like abdication of responsibility. It sounds like Augustine is saying humans cannot choose good without God directly giving them the power to do so. Pelagius believes otherwise. Humans have been given free will. We can choose to obey God's commands or disobey them. Yes, we need God's teaching to know what is right. Yes, we need Christ's example to show us how to live. But the actual choosing, the moral effort, the cultivation of virtue, these are up to us. If God has to give us the power to choose good, Pelagius argues, how are we responsible for our choices? If we cannot obey without special grace, then God is essentially setting us up to fail and then punishing us for the failure. This makes God unjust and makes moral effort pointless. Pelagius's view has a certain appeal, especially to those who take moral responsibility seriously. It emphasizes human agency, human effort, human dignity. We are not puppets, we are not helpless. We have been given commandments and the capacity to obey them. Now it is up to us. Augustine's response is swift and uncompromising. Pelagius, he argues, has fundamentally misunderstood human nature after the fall. Yes, humans were created with genuine free will. Adam and Eve could genuinely choose between good and evil, and they chose evil. But that choice did not just affect them, it damaged human nature itself. We inherit not just the guilt of Adam's sin, but the corruption it introduced. Our wills are not neutral, capable of choosing equally between good and evil. Our wills are bent, disordered, naturally inclined towards self rather than God. This is not a metaphor. It describes an actual condition, a spiritual illness that affects every human being born into this world. Think about it practically, Augustine urges. If Pelagius is right, if humans have the natural capacity to obey God's commands, why do even the best people fail so consistently? Why do we know what is right and still do what is wrong? Why is moral progress so difficult, so painful, so incomplete, even after years of effort? The problem is not ignorance. The problem is not lack of effort. The problem is a fundamental disorder in the will itself. We are not just weak, we are enslaved, bound by habits formed over years, by desires we did not choose, by inclinations that feel more powerful than our resolve. This is why Augustine prayed, "Grant what you command." He was not abdicating responsibility. He was acknowledging reality. We are responsible for our sins because we genuinely choose them, but we need God's grace to even want what is good, much less achieve it. Grace, in Augustine's understanding, is not just divine assistance added to human effort. Grace is God working in us to create the very will that wills the good. "You would not seek me if you had not already found me," Augustine writes. Even our seeking is a response to God's prior seeking of us. This leads to one of Augustine's most controversial teachings, predestination. If human will is so damaged that we cannot choose God without grace, and if grace is a free gift not based on any merit in us, then it seems to follow that God chooses who will receive grace. And if God chooses, then some are chosen and some are not. Augustine does not shy away from this conclusion. He insists that no one deserves grace, that all humanity deserves only judgment because of sin. If God chose to save no one, that would be just. If God chooses to save some, that is mercy. And if God does not save all, that does not make God unjust, because no one has a claim on being saved. This is where Augustine's teaching becomes difficult for many to accept, both in his own time and ever since. The elect are chosen by grace. The rest are passed over, left to the consequences of their sin. Augustine insists this is not arbitrary or cruel. God's ways are mysterious, but not unjust. We simply cannot see the full picture that God sees. The practical effects of this doctrine are complex. On one hand, it breeds humility. If you are saved, it is entirely due to grace, not your merit or effort. You have nothing to boast about. Everything good in you is God's gift. This undercuts spiritual pride at its root. On the other hand, it raises troubling questions. If salvation depends entirely on God's choice, why make any moral effort? If God has already decided who will be saved, what difference do our choices make? Augustine's answer involves distinguishing between divine causation and human action. God's choice does not eliminate human choice. It enables it. God chooses to save you by working in you, to create genuine faith and love. Your response is real, not forced. You truly believe and truly love. But even your believing and loving are gifts of grace. This remains paradoxical. How can God's sovereign choice and human free choice both be true? Augustine acknowledges the mystery but insists both truths must be held together. We are responsible moral agents who genuinely make choices, and God is sovereign, working all things according to divine purposes. Both are true even if we cannot fully reconcile them intellectually. The doctrine of grace becomes absolutely central to Western Christianity. The Protestant Reformation, 1100 years after Augustine, will return to his teachings on grace, faith, and predestination. Luther and Calvin will see themselves as Augustine's heirs, recovering truths the medieval church had obscured. But even the Catholic Church, while adjusting some of Augustine's more extreme positions, remains thoroughly Augustinian in its understanding of grace, original sin, and the necessity of divine assistance for salvation. For those listening tonight who struggle with the question of control and agency, Augustine's teaching offers something unexpected. It offers relief from the burden of saving yourself. You do not have to be strong enough, good enough, disciplined enough to earn God's favour. That way leads only to pride if you succeed, or despair if you fail. Instead, Augustine invites surrender. Acknowledge your need, confess your inability, ask for grace, and trust that the very asking is already evidence of grace working in you. You would not hunger for God if God had not first planted that hunger in your heart. This does not mean passivity. Grace energizes rather than paralyzes. When you know salvation depends on God rather than yourself, you are freed to work for good without the crushing anxiety of earning acceptance. Your efforts become response to grace rather than attempts to achieve it. The mystery remains. But perhaps mystery is the right category for this truth. The intersection of divine sovereignty and human freedom may be something we experience more than we understand, like the experience of making genuine choices, while knowing that God mysteriously works through those choices to accomplish divine purposes. As you surrender to sleep tonight, practice a small version of what Augustine describes. You cannot force sleep. The harder you try, the more elusive it becomes. But you can create conditions for sleep. You can relax, let go, trust the natural processes of your body to do what you cannot consciously control. Grace works similarly. You cannot force it, earn it, or make it happen through willpower. But you can open yourself to it, stop resisting it, trust that it is already at work even when you cannot see how. Grant what you command, and command what you will. Let this be your prayer tonight. Not a prayer of defeat, but of realistic hope. Not giving up on effort, but recognizing where real strength comes from. Augustine never intended to be a bishop. After his conversion, he returned to Africa, planning to establish a small monastic community. He would live quietly, pray, study, perhaps write a little. But God, as they say, laughs at our plans. In 391, Augustine visits the coastal city of Hippo. He attends church, where the elderly Bishop Valerius addresses the congregation. The bishop mentions needing a priest, someone educated and capable to help shoulder the burden of pastoral work. The congregation looks around, sees Augustine, and decides for him. They physically drag him forward and demand he be ordained. Augustine weeps at the altar, not from joy, but from dismay. He has read enough about pastoral ministry to know what is being thrust upon him. 4 years later, Valerius dies, and Augustine becomes Bishop of Hippo. He will hold this position for 35 years, until his death in 430. The quiet life of contemplation he had imagined will never materialize. Instead, he will spend decades managing church property, settling disputes between church members, preaching multiple sermons every week, defending orthodoxy against heresies, attending councils, writing countless letters. His daily schedule is exhausting. He rises early for prayer. Then comes a simple breakfast, followed by hours of administrative work. Legal disputes, financial matters, personnel decisions, correspondence that never ends. Lunch brings a brief rest, then more work through the afternoon. Sermons require preparation, often delivered with little notice when visiting preachers fail to appear. Augustine preaches regularly, sometimes multiple times in a day. His sermons are preserved, over 500 of them surviving to our time. They reveal a pastor who knows his congregation intimately, who can be tender or harsh depending on what the moment requires, who never stops trying to make profound truths accessible to ordinary people. The heresies keep coming. Donatists claim that priests who handed over scriptures during persecution have betrayed the faith and their sacraments are invalid. Augustine responds, the sacrament's power comes from Christ, not the priest's holiness. A sinful priest administering baptism does not invalidate the baptism. God works through unworthy instruments. This teaching has lasting implications. It means the church can be holy, even when its ministers are sinful. It means you do not need to find the perfect priest to receive valid sacraments. It means church authority does not depend on personal worthiness, but on God's promise to work through ordained means. The Arians deny Christ's full divinity. Augustine hammers out Trinitarian theology, explaining how Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are three persons, but one God. His psychological analogies, lover-beloved love and memory-understanding will, become standard ways of approaching this mystery. The Manichaeans, his old companions, still spread their dualistic gospel. Augustine writes treatises refuting the teachings he once embraced, showing Christians how to answer Manichaean objections. He knows their arguments intimately, knows where they sound plausible and where they finally fail. But it is the Pelagian controversy that consumes his later years and produces his most influential theological work. The debate over grace, free will, original sin, predestination shapes Western Christianity's understanding of salvation for the next 16 centuries. Augustine fights on so many fronts that his health suffers. He develops chronic illnesses, likely including severe digestive problems. Yet he continues working, continues writing, continues shepherding his flock even as his body weakens. The personal cost is high. He is lonely. His mother is dead. His son, Adeodatus, died young. His closest friends are scattered across the Mediterranean world, communications slow and uncertain. He craves the contemplative life he gave up, the hours of study and prayer that his pastoral duties constantly interrupt. Yet he never abandons his post. The people of Hippo need a shepherd. Heretics need to be refuted, lest they lead the faithful astray. The poor need advocacy against the powerful. Justice needs defending even when it is unpopular. This is the burden he accepted, however reluctantly, and he will carry it to the end. His sermons reveal the human Augustine behind the theological giant. He gets tired, irritated when the congregation does not pay attention. He makes jokes, uses common expressions, appeals to everyday experience. He is not above emotional manipulation when he thinks the situation demands it. In one sermon he describes seeing a married couple at church who had been quarrelling. "I will not give communion to either of you until you reconcile," he announces from the pulpit. The couple, shamed before the entire community, makes peace. Augustine's point is made. Church discipline is not just about abstract doctrine, but about how people treat each other. He cares deeply about the poor, constantly nagging wealthy parishioners to be more generous. He sells church property to ransom captives taken by barbarian raids. He argues that unused church decorations should be melted down to feed the hungry. Charity is not optional for Christians. It is the heart of the faith. Yet he also makes mistakes, decisions that history has judged harshly. When arguing against the Donatists, he supports using state power to compel them back to the Catholic Church. His reasoning: better to suffer temporary coercion that leads to salvation than to be left free to pursue heresy that leads to damnation. "Compel them to come in," he quotes from Jesus' parable of the Great Banquet. This text will be used for centuries to justify religious coercion, forced conversions, persecution of heretics. Augustine probably did not foresee these consequences, but his authorization of using state power for religious conformity becomes one of his most troubled legacies. The pattern repeats throughout history. Good people, convinced they possess truth, decide that forcing others toward that truth is a kind of loving discipline. The line between pastoral concern and authoritarianism blurs. Augustine crosses that line with devastating consequences for those who come after. Yet even here, Augustine's complexity emerges. He insists that physical force be limited, that no one should be killed for heresy, that the goal is conversion, not punishment. These limits would not always be observed by those who claimed his authority, but Augustine at least attempted to maintain them. His relationships with women remain ambiguous after his conversion. He writes beautifully about his mother Monica. He corresponds with several educated Christian women, offering spiritual direction and theological teaching. But he also holds views about women's nature and role that later feminists rightly critique as patriarchal and limiting. The celibacy he embraced never seems entirely comfortable for him. He still dreams of sexual encounters, which distress him deeply. Even decades after conversion, The body has desires that the will has not fully mastered. This ongoing struggle keeps him humble, aware of his continued need for grace. As bishop, Augustine lives simply, no luxury, no accumulating wealth. He shares meals with his priests, continues the semi-monastic lifestyle he began after conversion. But simplicity does not mean serenity. The demands never cease. The problems never stop requiring his attention. In his late writings, he compiles the Retractationes, reviewing his entire body of work, correcting errors, clarifying positions he now sees were unclear or wrong. This intellectual honesty is rare. Most people spend their later years defending positions taken in youth. Augustine willingly admits when he got things wrong, when better arguments changed his mind. He remains to the end a man of profound intellectual energy, matched with deep pastoral concern. The abstract theology never becomes merely abstract. It always serves the church, always aims at helping real people understand and live the faith. The philosopher and the pastor are one person, each dimension enriching the other. For those who find themselves thrust into responsibilities they never sought, Augustine's example offers cold comfort but genuine encouragement. The life you imagined may not be the life you get. The burden you did not want may turn out to be exactly the burden you needed to carry. The interruptions to your preferred plans may be precisely where grace is trying to work. Augustine wanted contemplation. God gave him administration. Augustine wanted solitude. God gave him community. Augustine wanted simple devotion. God gave him complex problems requiring sophisticated theological response. And through accepting what he did not choose, Augustine became who he was meant to be. As you rest tonight, release whatever burdens you carry that you never asked for, the responsibility that fell on you, the role you never auditioned for, the path you are walking because life closed other doors. Perhaps, like Augustine, you will discover that the interrupted life is exactly the life that shapes you into your truest self. The year is 430. Augustine is 75 years old. His body is failing. Hippo is under siege by Vandal armies sweeping through North Africa. The Roman Empire is collapsing in the West. Everything that provided order and stability for 4 centuries is coming apart. Augustine's friends urge him to flee. He is too important to risk capture or death. But Augustine refuses. I am the shepherd. I will not abandon the flock when wolves circle the fold. He asks for the penitential psalms to be written on the walls of his room so he can read them continuously. These psalms of confession and longing, of acknowledging sin while crying out for mercy, frame his final days. Even at the end, especially at the end, he is confessing his need for grace. Visitors come seeking advice, blessing, final words. Augustine speaks when he can, prays always. He knows the end approaches, and he meets it with the same honesty that marked his confessions decades earlier. He is ready, but not because he feels worthy. He is ready because he trusts in mercy. On August 28th, 430, Augustine dies. 3 months later, the Vandals will sack Hippo, but Augustine's library escapes destruction, carried away by fleeing monks who understand its value. The manuscripts survive, and through them, Augustine's voice will echo through the centuries. Think about the timing. Augustine dies as one world ends. The Roman world, the classical civilization that had dominated the Mediterranean for so long, is crumbling. Barbarian kingdoms are replacing imperial provinces. The infrastructure of roads and trade and communication is breaking down. But in that moment of historical darkness as civilization fragments, Augustine has provided something that will outlast empires. He has given the medieval world a comprehensive framework for understanding reality, for organizing thought, for integrating faith and reason. The collapsing Roman world will give birth to Christendom, and Christendom will be thoroughly Augustinian. His death marks a transition. The world of the Church Fathers ends. The medieval world begins, and at the bridge between them stands Augustine, his works preserving classical learning while reinterpreting it through Christian faith. The restless heart has found its final rest, but the ideas it generated, the questions it raised, the framework it established, these will continue shaping minds for the next 16 centuries and beyond. Walk into any major university philosophy or theology department, mention Augustine. Watch how conversations shift, how reference points emerge, how contemporary debates still carry traces of arguments. Augustine started 1500 years ago. The Protestant Reformation traces its theological roots directly to Augustine. Luther reads him and finds the doctrine of justification by faith alone. Calvin finds predestination and divine sovereignty. The Reformation cry of grace alone, faith alone, echoes Augustine's response to Pelagius. The Catholic Counter-Reformation also claims Augustine. The Council of Trent cites him repeatedly. His understanding of sacraments, church authority, the relationship between scripture and tradition all shape Catholic theology, even as Protestants are claiming him for their own side. Both are right to claim him. Augustine is too large, too complex to belong to one tradition. He stands at the fountain from which multiple streams flow. In philosophy, Descartes' famous "I think, therefore I am" finds its precursor in Augustine's argument against skepticism. When Augustine confronts doubters who claim we cannot know anything with certainty, he responds, "You cannot doubt that you doubt, and if you doubt, you think, and if you think, you exist." This is Descartes, 1,000 years early. Modern memory studies find Augustine anticipating their insights. Autobiographical memory, episodic memory, the constructive nature of remembering, the relationship between memory and identity. Augustine explored all of this through introspection and philosophical reflection. His analysis of time influences everyone from medieval scholastics to modern phenomenologists. Husserl, Heidegger, contemporary philosophers of mind all grapple with questions Augustine first articulated. Is time subjective or objective? How do we experience duration? What is the relationship between time and consciousness? In literature, the Confessions creates a genre. Autobiography before Augustine was rare and different. After Augustine, the inward journey becomes a legitimate literary form. Rousseau's Confessions deliberately echoes Augustine's title. Modern memoir owes a debt to Augustine's decision to examine his life publicly while confessing his sins before God and humanity. Political philosophy carries Augustinian marks. The recognition that politics cannot save, that earthly cities are provisional, that power corrupts even well-intentioned rulers, these insights shape realistic political thought from the medieval period through modernity. The doctrine of just war, with all its complexities and controversies, begins with Augustine's attempts to reconcile Christian pacifism with the practical necessity of protecting innocent people from aggression. Every contemporary debate about military ethics eventually traces back to Augustinian categories. His influence on Western psychology cannot be overstated. The idea of examining your inner life, of probing your motives, of recognizing unconscious drives and repressed desires, this psychological inwardness is thoroughly Augustinian. Freud is unthinkable without the precedent of the Confessions. Even his errors prove influential. The negative view of sexuality, the emphasis on original sin, the willingness to use state power for religious conformity. These dark threads run through Western Christianity, largely because of Augustine's authority. Critiquing Augustine requires first acknowledging how completely his ideas shape the tradition you are critiquing. Contemporary relevance emerges when you look at modern life through Augustinian lenses. The restlessness, the consumer culture promising satisfaction but delivering only temporary highs, the scattered attention, the commodification of everything. Augustine diagnosed these conditions before they existed in their current form. His fundamental insight remains: you are seeking something real. Your desires are not wrong, just misdirected. The restlessness is not a bug, it is a feature. You are made for something infinite, and finite things, however good, cannot ultimately satisfy infinite longing. The smartphone age, with its endless scroll and perpetual dissatisfaction, would not surprise Augustine. Of course, nothing satisfies. You are trying to fill an infinite void with finite things. Of course you are restless. Your heart was made for God, and nothing less will give it peace. His teaching on virtue addresses the self-help industry's failures. You cannot simply decide to become a better person, and then make it happen through willpower. Character formation requires grace, community, practices sustained over years. Quick fixes do not produce lasting change. The city of God speaks to our political moment. The temptation to treat politics as ultimate, to view election results as either salvation or apocalypse, to place all hope in getting the right people in power, Augustine would recognize this as idolatry. Politics matters, but it is not ultimate. Work for justice, but do not expect any political movement to usher in paradise. His most troubling legacy requires acknowledgement. The authorization of religious coercion, the suspicion of pleasure, the dualism between spiritual good and physical evil, these have caused real harm. Women, religious minorities, anyone whose sexuality did not conform to narrow norms, they have suffered partly because Augustine's authority was used to justify their persecution. Later generations took Augustine's ideas in directions he may not have intended, but he provided ammunition that was eagerly used against people he never met. This is part of his legacy too, and must be grappled with honestly. Yet even here, Augustine's own methodology offers resources for critique. His insistence on intellectual honesty, his willingness to revise positions when shown to be wrong, his recognition that we all need grace because we all fall short, these principles can be turned against his own errors. The university exists partly because of Augustine. The integration of faith and reason he modelled became the foundation for medieval scholasticism. The university is a place where difficult questions are pursued through rigorous argument, where authority is questioned and traditions challenged in service of truth. This owes a debt to Augustine's example. His literary legacy endures. The Confessions remains in print continuously since the invention of printing. Every generation finds something new in its pages. The combination of philosophical depth, psychological insight, and spiritual longing speaks across centuries to anyone wrestling with ultimate questions. For those listening tonight, Augustine's legacy might matter less as historical influence and more as contemporary resource. Here is someone who thought deeply, lived honestly, struggled genuinely. Someone who achieved worldly success and found it empty. Someone who tried intellectual sophistication and found it insufficient. Someone who experienced dramatic conversion but continued struggling with temptation. Augustine does not offer easy answers or quick solutions. He offers a framework for thinking about hard questions. He offers company for the journey. He offers permission to be honest about struggles while trusting in grace. Most importantly, he offers the central insight that continues to resonate. You are restless because you were made for something infinite, and the restless heart will never find final peace in anything finite. This is not bad news. It is the truth that sets you free to stop, expecting from created things what only the Creator can provide. Rest tonight in the company of all who have gone before, seeking truth, struggling with doubt, longing for peace, trusting in grace. The conversation continues. The journey goes on. The restless hearts of 16 centuries all echo the same truth. We are made for God, and nothing less will satisfy. As the gentle weight of sleep presses against your consciousness, let yourself settle into this moment. Not forcing rest, but allowing it. Not anxious about whether sleep will come, but trusting the natural rhythms of your embodied existence. Augustine would understand this surrender. He who spent so many years fighting, resisting, running from God, finally learned what all the restless must eventually learn. Sometimes the answer is not to try harder, but to stop trying. Sometimes strength comes through acknowledging weakness. Sometimes rest comes through giving up the effort to control everything. Your body knows what to do. You have slept thousands of times before. The process does not require your conscious management. Let the day's thoughts settle like dust in still air. Let the tensions dissolve like salt in water. Let the boundaries of self become a little softer, a little less defended. Augustine's journey from rebellion to rest was long and difficult. Yours may be too, or it may be simpler, quieter, less dramatic. There is no single path. Each restless heart finds its way home through its own particular geography of searching and finding. But the destination is the same. Rest in the one who made you for this rest. Peace in the love that will not let you go. Home in the heart of God, where every restless heart was always meant to dwell. The philosophy, the theology, the arguments and controversies, all of it serves one simple truth. You are loved, not because you earned it, not because you achieved it, not because you finally got your life together. You are loved because you exist, and your existence is a gift from the one who is love itself. Tonight, receive this gift. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to release today's burdens, enough to stop rehearsing yesterday's failures, enough to stop anxiously planning tomorrow's challenges, enough to simply be here, now, held in existence by a love that transcends understanding. Augustine's prayer becomes your prayer. Late have I loved you, beauty so ancient and so new. Late have I loved you, and yet not too late. Never too late. The invitation remains open. The door is never locked. The welcome is always extended. Tomorrow will bring its own restlessness. The search will continue. The questions will return. But for now, for these hours of sleep, let the searching cease. Let the questions rest. Let the restless heart remember it is loved. The gentle rhythms of breath and heartbeat carry you deeper into peace. You are more than your achievements, more than your failures, more than your anxieties and ambitions. You are a child of God, beloved before you did anything to earn love, beloved beyond any power to forfeit that love through your failures. Rest in this truth, sleep in this peace, and wake tomorrow to continue the journey, strengthened by this night's grace, sustained by the love that never sleeps even when you do. Augustine's restless heart found its rest. May yours find rest too, in whatever ways and whatever time is right for your particular journey. The ancient prayer echoes across 16 centuries. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Tonight, practice resting in that love. Tomorrow, continue the journey toward full rest. And always, always trust that the restless seeking is itself evidence of the homing instinct, the soul's compass pointing toward its true north. Sweet rest, dear traveller. Sweet peace, restless heart. You are home. If Augustine's journey resonated with something in your own heart, if these reflections brought any comfort or insight as you prepare for rest, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your presence here helps these conversations reach others who seek wisdom in the quiet hours. Hit the like button to share this exploration of Augustine's restless heart with others who might need to hear that their own restlessness is not a curse but a compass, pointing them toward home. Drop a comment. Where in the world are you listening tonight? What makes your heart restless? What, if anything, brings you peace? Share your journey with this community of nighttime philosophers. Until we meet again in these gentle hours of seeking and resting, may you find what Augustine found. Not the absence of questions, but the presence of love. Not the end of struggle, but strength for the journey. Not escape from time, but peace within it. May your restless heart find its rest. Good night, dear friends. Sweet dreams.